Let's talk about the Bengals because, Thomas, this is a team where I know people are, we even saw it today. Brandon Beane in his press conference. I don't know if you caught wind of that, but Brandon Beane said when they were asking him about, the edge that the Bengals had, he talked about, well, they have Burrow, who is the, first overall pick on a rookie deal. You have Jamar Chase, who's a fifth overall pick on a rookie deal. And Beane, I think, deridingly said, hey, I never want to be bad enough to pick fifth. And it's like, well, okay, but they were, and then now they're better than you. They made they made it further than you. I still think if you re-rack Bills Bengals, the Bills would still be favored, but they win over you. And I think the league's starting to find out what kind of edge there is in picking high and hitting on premium positions, like Burrow, like Chase, like Higgins, and what that bounty can be for you. Now, the bill is going to come due for the Bengals. They got to pay Burrow this offseason. Eventually, they're going to have to pay Chase. But for right now, this team is really hard to beat because of the way that they're constructed. And in many ways, I think they overcome some of the differences between them structurally, like front office and all that. They're different than most of these teams that are competing, aren't they?
Very different, and it's a good segue into how the Bengals approach things from just from Coach Brown, who came in there from way back when the Bengals were created. They've always been a very mom and pop group, right? And I say that respectfully enough. They've just been football through and through. They're not flashy, of course. From the most part nowadays, they're spending a lot more money than they used to spend, of course, but historically, this will be interesting for everyone. When I was a young scout growing up, right, when I was in my early years, I would go out to schools, right, and all the old boys would say, Thomas, Frank Smouse, he was a scout at time for the Bengals, right, one of the scouts, but they never had a big scouting staff. They used their coaches to go out and scout in the off season. They would keep expenses down. Well, what happened? Most of the personnel people would tell me as a neophyte scout, you can be nice to Frank and whoever else is scouting for him and the coaches, but don't share any information with them. And I'd say, why? They're like, the last thing you want is for an organization that doesn't believe in the bigger development of a scouting staff to reap the benefits and win, because it'll make other owners, this was way back, it'll make other owners believe that that's the way to do it. We were all rolling with, 20-something plus people in the scouting department, right? We had them all over. I'm saying all the teams that I had been with. So my point is, there were a lot of people that were worried about the Bengals thriving in a much smaller approach. And now let's just bring it to today. We have a guy like Duke Tobin. Duke Tobin categorically is one of the best out there, and he should have a GM job. Now, he probably picks not to have a GM job, right? They don't name him necessarily the GM there, right? Is he a VP of player personnel or SVP?
I believe so. Yeah, I think that's his title. He's kind of effectively building the team, but it's not a title that he doesn't have the same title as some of his contemporaries in the league.
But his dad's there. His dad, Bill Tobin, was one of the best, through and through best. He comes from great football stock. And again, the Browns are very good people, and they do it the way they want to do it because that's how they wanted to do it. I just think right now, so put that aside, that the things that I learned that many years ago, it's still a fairly small personnel staff, but they know Duke Tobin leads it so well, along with his head coach. Again, same kind of thing. They know the lines. They work together. There's not, and I want to throw it over to you from a coaching standpoint in your perspective. They don't just go off and go in different directions, right? Duke Tobin understands coaches and football people because he's been around it. Another one, been around it since the day he was born. So he has a really good understanding on how he navigates through the ups and downs of building a football team, along with any coach that he's been with while he's been there, to where they are right now.
No, for sure. And I think what one of the benefits that they have in terms of being like, not being as being a spendthrift is sort of like, they're loyal, right? Like, Marvin Lewis was there for a long time, and they kind of had two pop-ups with Marvin Lewis. Like early on in the Carson Palmer days, they had the 05 season where they won the division. They had the 09 season when they won the division. And then they kind of had, Carson Palmer didn't want to be there anymore, right? And so then they let him go. They trade him for a few first-round picks, and then they go and they get Andy Dalton and A.J. Green in the same draft, your Julio Jones draft. You ended up with Julio. They ended up with A.J. Green, and they win, a few years in a row there. And their faith in Marvin Lewis was sort of rewarded, right? And then, when I moved here, I like going to Bengals games. I went to a few Bengals games, and they were down bad, man. And every Uber driver was like, "Oh, this team's horrendous," all this kind of stuff. And yet, then they get Zac Taylor in the building, and the first 2 years, Zac won 6 games, and everybody's like, "Oh, if you were at any other franchise than the Bengals, you would be fired, right? Any other franchise." That was what the media would say. And yet they're like, well, no, we're going to stick with Zac Taylor, right? And now we're talking about Zac Taylor having a chance to go 4-0 against Andy Reid, who's objectively a top 10 coach, if not top 5 coach in NFL history. And there have been games when Zac Taylor gave Andy Reid he ran around Andy Reid. The first game at Paycor last year, he completely out chess matched him. And we think about this in terms of development, like that's a guy that everybody kind of poo-pooed, right? Oh, he's he had a cup of coffee with Sean McVay once. That's why he's the head coach. Like literally all the tropes that they came out for Zac Taylor were said, and yet you give the guy a great quarterback. And I think, we're all going to watch and look, and Burrow's the main guy there, but Zac Taylor's doing his part. Then you give him a wide receiver. By the way, that team, they did the analytical thing. Like most people in analytics were saying, you got to get a wide receiver to get open in under 2.5 seconds. Don't draft Penei Sewell, a fine player. But they were like, get a wide receiver and get open 2.5 seconds and deal with everything else. Last week, they had 3 offensive linemen injured in the snow, and Burrow just got rid of the ball quickly against one of the best defenses in football, and having Jamar Chase was there. They obviously, picking Burrow, everybody else is going to pick Burrow. That's the thing. But then the rest of the roster construction, in my opinion, was very strategic and very smart. And now they're sitting here and they're slight favorites in this weekend's game in Kansas City against a team that's hosted 5 straight of these AFC title games. This team, is a for real juggernaut kind of championship caliber football team, and they've done it differently than other people have.
And to your point, just to bring it back to Duke Tobin and that group, strategic on how they put things together. And again, everyone is cheering for him now much more because they realize he is a football guy through and through, but has a very broad mind and an open mind to utilize his proper elements of analytics and the approach. Not saying that they're out there spending a ton of money on it, but he understands it. He's a Boulder guy, right? He went to the University of Colorado. Again, he has. I don't want to keep harping on him because I think it's the relationship that, again, he has with his head coach, your point about Zac, and the way that they treat and approach the building of the entire roster together. And again, quite honestly, they also are smart about how they use their coaches in the scouting and the evaluation side, which is vital in this world. You can't be at a separate end of the spectrum, right? You have to be working with your personnel staff and your coaching staff, which I believe the Bengals do a really good job with.
Yeah, and they hired Sam Francis a couple of years ago as their analytics person. They were a very, like when I started at PFF, you're talking about like they had maybe like 1 or 2 developers on their whole, computer programmers on the whole staff. They hire Sam, and you can kind of see that he's informing Zac on the sideline during the games, and like you're talking about a person who's very thoughtful about the game, who's researched the game really well. And Zac Taylor, to his credit, to what you just talked about a few minutes ago with respect to front offices, as a coach, he's somebody who's doing a good thing. He's not necessarily brilliant in any aspect of the game, but he's delegating and obviously leaning on a great quarterback. And that team picks up dollar bills on the ground during the games, whether it be clock management, whether it be 4th down decisions, those kind of things. And that is a very, big deal. And that's why they're here. And that's why, as a Kansas City Chiefs fan, I am not at all. I was unnervous last year when they played the Bengals in the AFC title game. And boy, was I surprised when I had to leave that field after they won. I would not be in the slightest surprise if they won Sunday. They are a worthy foe to the Chiefs.